Imagine a man who worked his way up from the bottom of a gutter to become one of the most feared and powerful individuals in the world of organized crime. The story of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán is one of power, riches, daring escapes, and the final fall. But how does a poor boy from the mountains of Sinaloa turn into one of history's wealthiest cocaine lords? What led him to his spectacular captures and infamous prison breaks? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you like this content, please take a second to enjoy this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, is it done? Great. Thank you so much. Let's get into the story of El Chapo. Joaquín Guzmán was born into a poor family in the tiny village of La Tuna in the mountains of Sinaloa. The young Joaquín spent his early life in a humble little house amidst the rock beauty of the Sierra Madre Mountains. But all this beauty camouflages one brutal reality. Most of the families in this region were into cultivating poppies and marijuana, raw materials meant for heroin and other drugs. Guzmán's father, Emilio, was a cattle rancher and notorious for his violence and drug trade. Hard and never forgiving, Emilio often lashed out at his children. The drug trade was not only means to survival, but also an escape for young Joaquín from the life of poverty and violence that surrounded him. By the time he was a teenager, he had begun to grow marijuana for money, and soon after, all the locals noticed that. By the end of the 1980s, Guzmán had become an important figure in the narcotics trade. It was until he left to begin his own organization, Sinaloa Cartel, that he was working for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, leader of the Guadalajara cartel. Guzmán soon built a reputation for brutality, cleverness, and skill at outmaneuvering his enemies. The Sinaloa cartel, under his command, turned into an empire and seized the biggest share of the drug trade between Mexico and the United States. The Sinaloa cartel reached prominence due to violence such as kidnappings, murders, and proliferation of tunnels across the US-Mexico border were done with seemingly open patents by this organization. Guzmán started a new way of trafficking, which included the building of sophisticated tunnels, making his cartel almost impossible to be brought down. His new wealth surged, and he was estimated to have a net worth of more than $12.6 billion. To Guzmán, power was not about the money. It was about the control attributed to having money. The higher he rose, and the more powerful that made him, the greater the law enforcement pressure on him mounted. Pressured by the United States, the Mexican government focused its full attention on Guzmán, but catching him would prove no easy task. He was finally caught in the mid-1990s. He was arrested in 1993 in Guatemala and then sent to Mexico and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was then sent off to the high-security Puente Grande prison, which is designed to house the most dangerous of offenders. This near Guadalajara prison boasted an exemplary security record and was considered one of the most tightly guarded in Mexico. But Guzmán was no ordinary criminal. Behind bars, he bided his time for almost 8 years, befriending guards and prison officials by buying his way to the top. Inside Puente Grande, Guzmán lived a life of ultimate luxury. With cell phones, the finest foods, he was not like the other inmates. He ran the prison from inside. On January 19, 2001, he carried out the switch. Guzmán fled by hiding himself in a laundry cart, courtesy of the people who were supposed to be holding him behind bars in one of the most humiliating chapters in the Mexican law enforcement history. As the cart wheeled out of prison, Guzmán was smuggled past several checkpoints, each with a different guard who had been bribed. Emerging into the cool night air outside, he was whisked away in a waiting vehicle and on into the night. His escape was a huge slap in the face to the government of Mexico, and before long, the legend of El Chapo started to grow. For many years after his breakout, he remained at large, still working at his craft and building his operation. Despite the full-scale manhunt that had begun to take hold by the Mexican authorities, Guzmán was able to stay one step ahead, with his many sources on the street and holed up in safe houses. At this point, the Sinaloa cartel was at its strongest. All it added was his folklore, the fact that Guzmán had been able to escape from a prison he was not supposed to get out of. But inasmuch as his escape cemented his reputation as a criminal mastermind, it also made the efforts to bring him before the law even stronger. Fast forward to 2014, and it saw him back in custody. Years on the run finally came to an end when he was captured in a seaside resort in Mazatlan, Sinaloa in February. The operation was in cooperation with both Mexican Marines and U.S. law enforcement and marked a major victory for the Mexican government. Guzmán was sent to Altiplano prison, one of the most secure in Mexico. Authorities swore that this time there would be no escape. But if there was one thing that by now the world had learned, it was that El Chapo was not a man who remained behind bars for long. One evening in July 2015, Guzmán made his most audacious escape. In his cell, while taking a shower, he began to lift a small hatch hidden under the floor. Beneath it was a 1.5-kilometer tunnel going from the prison to a construction site outside the prison walls. It was a technological marvel, as the tunnel had lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle mounted on tracks to accelerate the escape. For months, the cartel had been secretly digging this tunnel with the best engineers, using highly sophisticated tools. As Guzmán escaped through the tunnel, the guards had no idea how the most dangerous prisoner in the facility was making his getaway. By the time the guards checked and found him missing, Guzmán was long gone, once again disappearing into the night. The tunnel ended and a vehicle was waiting to whisk him to safety. The escape turned into an international incident. The world watched in utter incredulity as the Mexican government mounted a massive manhunt to recapture the elusive drug lord. This is hugely embarrassing for the Mexican government, as the incident called into serious question corruption and security within the country's prison system. It became one of the most talked about events of the year, wherein the Altiplano escape further cemented Guzmán's reputation as a master of escape. Months were spent by Guzmán in hiding, moving from safe house to safe house. He didn't use a cell phone, but instead employed trusted messengers to communicate with his associates. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he could not remain under wraps forever. A string of mistakes, including an attempt to make a biographical film of his life, led to his being found by the authorities. El Chapo was a free man for a short time. At the beginning of 2016, the authorities tracked him to a safe house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. On January 8, 2016, the pre-dawn raid by Mexican Marines emerged as bloody shootings. Guzmán barely managed to escape the shooting and used the tunnel to get out of the house. But his luck finally ran out. Guzmán and one of his top lieutenants resurfaced in a sewer drain several blocks away, only to find themselves surrounded by Marines. In desperation, Guzmán hijacked a vehicle, but it was too late. The authorities caught up with him, and after a brief chase, he was finally apprehended. This time, the Mexican government wasn't taking any chances. They knew that with Guzmán in Mexico, there was always a chance he could break out again. After multiple charges were filed in the United States against Guzmán for drug trafficking, murder conspiracy, and money laundering, his extradition finally occurred in 2017. The subsequent trial ranked among the most notorious on record, with testimony from a parade of witnesses regarding the full range of Guzmán's crimes. In 2019, Guzmán was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years. He was sent to ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado, considered the most secure facility within the United States. It is here that Guzmán will spend the remainder of his days, far from the power and wealth that once flowed through his hands. The story of Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán is one of extremes, with extreme wealth, violence, and audacity. His life has been the subject of countless books, movies, and TV shows that add to the mythology of a man who became an international symbol of the drug trade. But Guzmán lives, yet his life as he knew it is over. Now he sits in a small cell without windows in Colorado, far from the glories and the power he had known throughout his life. Guzmán's story serves as a reminder of the complex and often tragic consequences of the global drug trade that continues to take lives on both sides of the border. But as we close this chapter in his story, one question still begs to be answered. How many more will follow in his footsteps? Share your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more in-depth stories about the world's most notorious characters.